Skinny latte, no foam, he said to the barista. Oh, and give me a blueberry muffin. The muffin was an everyday treat for Bert. As he waited, he studiously avoided looking outside towards the final bank of newspaper vending machines, their metal posts planted in the sidewalk. A black one, a brown one, and two red ones, the last of which held the key to his treat. Inside that machine were copies of this week's LA exclusive newspaper, although the term newspaper was a bit of a misnomer. There was no news inside, only page after page of adverts for escorts, predominantly female but with a scattering of men and transgender prostitutes, all selling limitless variations of the same thing: sex. It was the endless variation on a theme that captivated Bert, not just in terms of all the different physical types, ages, and races, but in the array of services they offered, some so outlandish that even the thought of them made Bert queasy. Sometimes the ads had pictures, too, although he had learned from a couple of disappointing liaisons that they couldn't always be relied upon to be accurate. Still, contained within the pages was a wonderland of possibilities, like a huge candy store for grown-ups. Inside those little boxes was an array of women, all of whom would have sex with Bert in return for money. From corn-fed Midwestern runaways, who no doubt told themselves that what they were doing was no different from what they'd done at home in the backseat of a car on a Saturday night, through the 20-something maws, model, actress, whatevers, with their gravity-defying silicone boobs and jaded air of disappointment that they weren't even going to make the Z-list, all the way to the hardened professionals, women who had long ago reconciled their hopes and dreams with the reality of making a living by lying on their backs. Over the years, Bert had sampled them all. Recently, though, he'd begun to find a sameness to the experience, and to feel a dark, lonely emptiness once the encounter was over. Where once he'd felt satiated, now his monthly liaisons left Bert hungry for something other than sex. For intimacy, maybe? Last month, in the awkward post-coital moments, and with 10 minutes still officially on the clock, he had lain in bed with a young redhead in a condo in Playa del Rey. He'd asked her if they could spoon, cuddle in together, his arms around her. She'd looked at him like he was nuts and asked him to leave, reaching into a bedside table and producing a handgun to emphasize that she wasn't kidding. Strangely, he had never felt much guilt about paying women to have sex with him, rationalizing that a real affair, one with emotions and feelings, would be far more upsetting to his wife. That was part of the reason he never visited the same woman twice. Well, that and the fact that he liked the variety. Living in L.A., you could sample all that the world had to offer in the way of women without leaving the city boundaries. As long as you didn't want a hug at the end. "Sir, is this to go?" The barista's question snapped Bert back to the tiny coffee shop, which was starting to fill with office workers. Yeah, thanks," Bert mumbled, handing over $10 and waiting for change. He put the 2 single-dollar bills into the tip jar and kept the coins, which he'd need to pay for his copy of the newspaper. Then he picked up his coffee and the brown paper bag holding his muffin and wandered back outside into the early morning California sunshine. He stood for a second, sorting through his change and trying to get back a little of the good feeling he'd left the house with that day. The good feeling that came from his little secret. At lunchtime, he'd sneak to the men's room, peruse the women on offer that week, then make a phone call. With his department offering flexible working hours, he'd reclaim the time he'd banked by getting into the office early and drive over to the woman's apartment. He was thinking that maybe he'd try someone a little older today, someone who might not find it strange that a man of his age would trade sexual gymnastics for a hug. Or maybe, he thought, smiling to himself, he'd find a hot little spinner and screw her until her eyes popped out of her head. It was only then, standing on the sidewalk, lost in his own thoughts,